Founder Series virtual event, The Chief Cultural Officer Role, featuring a distinguished panel of guests visiting us today from the United Kingdom, Colombia, Atlanta, Georgia, South Florida, and Puerto Rico. My name is John Wensveen, and I am the Chief Innovation Officer at Nova Southeastern University and Executive Director of the Alan B. Levan NSU Broward Center of Innovation. Before we get into a discussion with our panelists, I would like to take an opportunity to provide an overview of the Alan B. Levan NSU Center of Innovation. The Levan Center is a public-private partnership between Nova Southeastern University and Broward County. We are building an economic and education development engine that is an opportunity gateway for Greater Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, and South Florida with local, regional, national, and international impact. One of our goals is to better link the South Florida innovation ecosystem by offering customized programs, events, and wraparound services to support the founder's journey from birth of an idea through successful exit of a company or global expansion. Our three themes include innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. Our four pillars are ideate, incubate, accelerate, and post-accelerate. Our six outcomes include breakthrough ideation, new technologies, talent skills pipeline, new jobs, company formation, and scaling of early stage and young startup companies. We are launching a purpose-built 54,000 square foot facility in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, now under construction, and we look forward to opening this summer. Details of our progress can be found on our website at nova.edu/innovation. Chief Cultural Officer or Chief Culture Officer is a relatively new title starting to pop up in corporate and government environments internationally. Today's key objective is to discuss the benefits and challenges of cultural diversity on a global basis. What is the role of the Chief Cultural Officer? The CCO is responsible for incentivizing a team by promoting communication, alignment, goals, and recognition. In other words, the CCO's objective is to analyze the culture of a team. CCOs are not just associated with large innovative companies, but smaller organizations as well. The building, managing, and merging of cultures has become a full-time effort in the new economy. Roberto Maciaro from Renaissance Evolution and author of the book Chief Cultural Officer, 8 Pillars Toward Sustained Global Influence said, "Any great leader must be visionary, master convener, and culture influencer. Visionary because you must predict where the future is trending now and how individuals will respond. Master convener because collaboration requires willing people, but also someone to put the right people in a collaborative space and frame of mind. You achieve this through a combination of people, skills, and technological expertise. Culture influencer because more people means more variation and potential chaos. Creating organizational music that generates revenue is the goal. You accomplish this through a centralization of information that supports access, understanding, and trialability. As people arrive to solve problems, they bring their strengths to engage comfortably in the system of interaction, the culture intentionally created. With artificial intelligence and blockchain-based social interactions, the Chief Cultural Officer is a necessary position, leveraging both institutional knowledge and novel technologies." Let's get right into the discussion, and panelists, please feel free to introduce yourselves as we start with the first question. Tell us who you are and what you do, and please don't be shy. So what we will do as we lead off this next presentation, I'm just going to go around my screen, and Russ, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks for that, John, and hello, everyone. My name is Russ Shaw. I'm the founder of Tech London Advocates and Global Tech Advocates. These are communities of tech leaders, founders, entrepreneurs, investors, corporates, universities, all coming together as volunteers to support their local and regional tech ecosystems and to identify and get through the issues and challenges that those ecosystems face. The London group was set up 8 years ago. We've now grown to 18 networks across the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific.
Well, thank you for joining us across the pond, and a good afternoon to you. And I'll go to the next person on my screen, Jose from Puerto Rico.
Thank you, John, and welcome everyone. Thank you for inviting us into your home or office or wherever you may be today. It's a pleasure. So my name is Jose Rodriguez, and I head two companies funded by a private equity fund out of Puerto Rico, multinational companies that focus on technology. One being Blackburn Networks, which provides data and capacity, fiber, satellite, etc., primarily through 3 subsea cables that we have that takes us into 12 different countries throughout the Caribbean and Latin America. And then the Sigfox operation, Sigfox being a global entity IoT network where we have the exclusivity for 3 markets: Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and U.S. Virgin Islands, where we've deployed the networks and essentially run these IoT and connectivity operations, bringing connectivity to the people and to these countries to create smart cities, smart countries. And on the other hand, I'm also the co-founder with Roberto Maciero of Renaissance Evolution, which brought about a lot of these discussions about the chief cultural officer and utilizing this methodology that we'll be discussing today. So again, a pleasure, and looking forward to having this discussion with you.
Great, thank you, Jose. The next person on my screen is Paula from Broward County here in South Florida.
Hi, thank you, John. Thank you for having us. My name is Paula Isaac Baraya. I work for the Broward County Office of Economic and Small Business, and practically we're the agency for economic development for Broward County. And I'm responsible for international trade, but pretty much everything is the yin and the yang with international. It's a little bit like I feel like I'm a chief cultural officer myself, because it's not only promoting export, but it's also inbound investment. It's also promoting relationships with other countries. And that's what really makes us a global hub here. So I've been with the county 8 years. We have different programs to teach companies on how to export. And we do a big conference every year, the Florida International Trade and Cultural Expo. We bring 60 countries, former presidents. And as well, that's where we initiated with our panel. One of our opening ceremony featured the chief cultural officer, because it's an important component of international trade and building relationships. So thank you for having me today.
And thank you for joining us. And last but not least, Darrell, I know is from Atlanta, Georgia, but currently visiting the Sunshine State here, and welcome.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And as you can see, he saved the best for last. My name is Darrell Booker, and I work for this little company you might have heard of called Microsoft. As you know, we're a global tech company. I'm very much a techie at heart, 20 plus years, but I haven't coded in the last few years. I've kind of took all of what I've been doing with that and working within our philanthropies group, more specific tech for social impact, which is geared towards helping nonprofits and service-based organizations globally on making sure that they have everything that they need to be as efficient with tech. But more specifically, as of last June, I created and now leading one of our CEO's racial equity commitments in the wake of the George Floyd murder. And that's called the Nonprofit Tech Acceleration for Black and African American Communities. So when we talk about culture and diversity and conclusion and success and entrepreneurship and all of these things that kind of go hand in hand, I'm really working to be able to see how we can bridge success, which everybody's really looking for, and communities. And I'm really excited for the Innovation Center that you all are putting together, because I see these popping up around the country. And to me, that is that bridge that can kind of bring, some of those things to people that are striving to be really successful. So excited for the conversation here today, John.
Well, thank you, and thanks for joining us. And Octavio just joined us as well. We had a technical glitch getting connected, but Octavio is joining us from Barranquilla, Colombia. So we're just doing brief introductions. If you just want to tell us who you are, what you do, and then we're going to get right into the questions.
Thank you, John. My apologies for I had some connection problems. Well, good morning to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here in this panel. First of all, I would like to thank John, also Terry and Patricia for this kind of invitation. It's a great honor. Also would like to say hello to the other speakers. I work as a dean of Norte Business School in Colombia. I've been in the education sector for around 23 years. I have a PhD at University of Hull in England, and more recently a postgraduate degree in organizational leadership at University of Oxford. And more important than that, I'm lucky to have a wife and 2 kids and 2 dogs. So I'm ready.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Octavio. So now we're going to get right into the questions, and this will be for each of our panelists, and we'll start with Darrell as the first response. Over the past year, we have seen technology bring many global markets together and continue to build the bridge between global teams within an organization. With these continued convergences, there are major benefits and opportunities to become globally aware and inclusive. Let us start the conversation with your definition of corporate culture, and how does your organization or local market create an effective cross-cultural environment or brand internally or externally? So there's a lot of information there, so I'll leave it up to you in terms of how you'd like to respond, but we'll start with Darrell.
Yeah, I think the one thing that really jumped out when you talk of culture, company culture, global, bringing people together, is really making sure everyone has a voice, and kind of that seat at the table. Even when we start to think about, these terms of, diversity and inclusion, and, someone said, and I think it really hits home, is, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. So when I think of culture, I think of global companies. To me, that is the foundation, is making sure that, these people that you've invested in, I mean, you hired them, so obviously you want what's inside their brains. So ensuring that you set up, whatever those processes, workflows, and, hey, just frankly, conversations, so that you can actually hear the voice of everybody that's part of your organization. That's really what I heard out of that.
Oh, I appreciate that response. Thank you so much. We're going to go over to Paula, if you're able to take that one.
Yes, definitely. Well, basically, I'm going to look at it at a more broader scope because we're teaching companies on how to export. And I think the number one thing we teach them is about building and fostering relationships in other countries. That's key to bringing a lot of big contracts to a company. So what the chief cultural officer could be in somehow of a role, or somebody that has a role in an organization, is really kind of how can we open doors. I see it more like as an opening doors and building relationship role, where that's what we teach. And we have a program called the 11 Steps to Exporting, is how do you bring about opportunities in your companies, reaching out to other culture and broadening your horizon through relationships and door opening. So that's more in a kind of a global scope that I see the role, whether it's like somebody who has that exact title or somebody being just, involved with exporting and playing that role of a sorts. Yeah.
So that's what I love about the subject, is there's so many different perspectives and definitions and understandings of what chief cultural officer is or can be. And that's where I'm really anxious to see where this conversation goes by the end of our hour today. Octavio, would you be able to take that question, please?
Yes, I think corporate culture is a powerful way to hold a company together. Because I think that's the first aspect that we should look for. How do we assure the survival of the company in the long term? And corporate culture plays a key role. Corporate culture, it's a strategy. I mean, you could have the best strategic plan, but the way to implement it is with people and a very strong corporate culture. The other aspect I would like to share is that we have to consider several dimensions. I mean, corporate culture reflects the identity of a company, reflects the human interactions. And there are two authors I usually read, Goffey and Jones. They propose 4 scenarios. When we talk about human interactions, the first one refers to fragmented company. I mean, you don't have social interactions, you don't get results. The other one is mercenary company. I mean, you get very good results, but people is not interacting very well. The other one is network company. You got a very good social interactions, but you don't survive in the long term. And the last one is communal, a scenario you have a balance. So a corporate culture really is a driver of performance. It's a driver of change. And in that sense, the chief cultural officer plays a key role for the sustainability of the company, but also to really to drive the change when you need it. You could be a very good company, you could perform very well, but perhaps that's not enough. Then the chief cultural officer plays a key role implementing change management, for example, concepts, and in terms of the long term.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you for that response. Jose, your turn.
Octavio, you said something there. I totally agree. I think it was that quote from Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. I totally agree. The companies may have the best possible plans, interests, resources, strategies. And at the end of the day, it's people that execute and people that make it happen. And if the people are either untrained, not ready, or just quite simply not able to engage at these levels, whether it be locally or multinationally, the company will suffer for it. At the end of the day, I like to think, and I know that business is personal. A lot of people say it's not personal, it's just business. No, business is very personal. And when you start leading with companies, when you start leading with that corporate culture and you engage, you put a face behind that company, you put a face behind that brand. And if those faces, if those people, if there's no relationship there, you're not going to do business with that company, or you're not going to do enough business with that company. So that human interaction, that art of connectivity, is really what I think that in my opinion, the chief cultural officer is all about, to ensure that yes, that culture internally and externally really matches the needs of both the employees, the stakeholders, but also the people that you're doing business with, and in the countries where you're executing business.
So very valid point too. And you think about over the last year plus what's gone in our world, and those in-person connections that we're used to making, that now we're relying on technology, and there are certainly pros and cons to being able to do it, but it's been quite amazing to see how people have been more innovative in terms of how they communicate and still have that in-person experience, if you will, to make things go. We may touch on that as we get towards the end of our conversation today. And Russ, you're get the opportunity to close on this question.
Sure. Well, I guess in terms of how I think about corporate culture, I just think of it as the way things are done within an organization as it relates to attitudes, norms, values, behaviors, et cetera. And a lot of my time is spent with startups and scale-ups, and many of them don't necessarily have the luxury or the budgets to appoint a chief cultural officer. So I think a lot of that responsibility goes to the founder, the co-founders, the CEO of the organization. And one of the things that we talk about here in London, what we've seen over the past 8 to 10 years, is London has emerged as a top 5 tech hub globally on many of the international rankings that we see. And I like to say to people that, look, a key reason why we're there is that 1/3 of our London tech workers are from overseas. They're from Europe, they're from Africa, they're from India, they're from North America, China, et cetera. And that cultural diversity is helping us to build. We've now got over 80 tech unicorns in the UK, of which over 50 are here in London. And I think that diverse cultural mix in these organizations is really helping these startups and scale-ups to build world-class products and services that are also helping them to achieve either great exits, great IPOs. We're seeing them regularly on the London Stock Exchange, or successful exits through acquisition.
Yeah, it's amazing what's going just in the UK generally, and especially with Brexit being a challenge among all of this too. That's probably another conversation, but some fascinating things happening in the UK. As we get into the next question, and Paulo, I'll have you lead this one off. What are some of the trends, opportunities, challenges, or strategies in taking a company global? And keeping this question pretty gray, and so that you can have your own response to how this, because I think everybody will interpret this a little bit differently, but really interested in trends, opportunities, challenge, or strategies as you take a company global or an organization global.
Thank you, John. Well, not many people know, but it's really stunning. Like less than 1% of businesses in the US export. So you would think that there's more companies that are not afraid to exporting, but I think the biggest challenge is they're so consumed with their day-to-day activities that going global can be daunting, can feel like a little bit overwhelming, and just changing the business model of a company, especially if you're a smaller businesses, small to medium businesses. So basically, that's a challenge that I've seen with a lot of companies that are afraid to take that step, and that's why we created the 11 steps to exporting, a roadmap to exporting success, because you really have to take it step by step, and you have to be export ready. Yes, you can receive orders here and there from around the world. Yes, you can open doors, but being export ready is really key, because it reflects the global strategy of your company and not to have failure in another country. So really, I think it's basically to see how a company can scale it and take it on a step-by-step basis. But that's what we notice about businesses coming to our workshops, our webinars, and they're just afraid to take that first step. But we're trying to make them see the benefit of it, the return on investment, and how they can take it gradually and organically.
So I'm really intrigued by the program, 11 Steps to Exporting, and I also feel a similar program for importing. So when you're having the connection at both ends of the map, if you will, so there's the entry and the exit, and how does all that fit together? And I'd love to talk to you more about the program specifically. Russ, I'll go back to you on this question.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, my advice for everybody watching is, look, don't underestimate this. This can be harder than it actually looks. We work with a lot of startups, as I've mentioned, and tech is global by its very nature, and we do encourage a lot of businesses to expand internationally. And I guess I kind of think of it across two perspectives. There are kind of the hard issues to deal with, whether that's around the compliance of moving into a new market, recruiting talent in a new market. How do you set up your business entity? And there are organizations out there that can help you to do that. We work with an organization called Globalization Partners, which does great work in this space. And then there are the softer sides of this as well. We see, for example, UK startups, when they expand to the US, they might go to Florida, they might go to California. Usually the co-founder or a senior member of the team moves with that expansion. And part of the reason why they do that is, as they're recruiting the local talent, they want to make sure that the values, the ideals, the vision of the company is really being shared with those people being recruited on the ground. So you're not doing it from 4,000 miles away, but you've got one of the senior leaders of the company actually working there. That's a costly exercise in terms of doing it, but if you can get it right and build another entity in your organization that really models where your company started from, you're really on your pathway to success.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned moving to Florida, because it seems like the whole world's moving to Florida right now with everything that's going on. There's a lot of hype in South
Florida. Florida is the hot spot. We're hearing about it here in the UK all the time. So who knows when we'll probably be there pretty soon.
Well, we're open for business, and the most common tagline that you hear these days is "Work in the cloud, live in the sun," and we're going to keep promoting that. So, great place to be. Thank you for that input, Russ. Jose, what are your thoughts?
Let me unmute here. So, I think a lot of companies are multinational and they don't know it, or they don't feel like they're multinational. And this is something that's been happening through globalization, through making the world much smaller and more accessible through technology and other means. And let me explain. So you've got companies right now that maybe don't have operations in multiple countries, but they do have vendors, relationships. Maybe they've offshored some component of their operation also to another country or to a group in another market. And the complexities of that do not become evident until you start doing it. And many sort of do it accidentally, sort of stumble their way into a multinational operation, again, without even knowing it. So when you're dealing with different vendors from a number of different countries, cultures, religions, politics, backgrounds, economical backgrounds, all of that starts coming into play. And I think that for some of these companies that are moving in that direction, again, even though they may not have physical operations in these other markets, this is part of this education, and this is part of this understanding, and having the right folks internally to help them deal with that and to help them interact with some of those elements of their operation that, again, they might not know are multinational.
Mm-hmm. So that's a great point, which is really a great segue, I think, into Darrell and Microsoft, multinational corporation. I mean, you must have unbelievable knowledge and stories to tell.
I actually want to take a different angle, John. Okay. I mean, very, very much, Microsoft is massive, but a little bit around piggybacking off of Jose, I think the big issue is a little bit around awareness and just the opportunity to be global. And if I were to give you a really relatable example, if you look at the last year in the pandemic, and, the number of small businesses that suffered. And let me, give you an example. Let me take a business, in a community, some small boutique shop that really relied on foot traffic, and they were crushed because they were never set up for e-commerce. They were never even selling outside of their neighborhood into other cities, into other states. And for a lot of people, like I said, it's just not even the awareness of the opportunity. So, it really starts with a lot of that education and letting, entrepreneurs and small businesses know very early on, that those are those opportunities. And to Jose's point, they don't even realize they're doing some of these things because your manufacturer may be, somewhere else. So if you're getting your goods from these certain places, then you also can be selling there. And, that's hopefully what, I think, collectively, we as a society is helping to build that knowledge so that, companies can be a lot more global.
Yeah, a great response. I appreciate that. And Octavio.
There's an interesting research of the Business Harvard Review. They analyzed 20,000 companies in 30 countries, and they said it takes 10 years really to move forward in terms of going global, and only 40% of them were able to have a return on assets more than 3%. That means that this is a very difficult job. And I would suggest 4 aspects. The first one, I think is the most important one, is to understand the business context. Taking a company global really requires to understand the context in which you are going to operate. Let's say in Latin America, for example, if you're going to develop a digital marketing strategy, you need to know that there is a low level of connectivity in terms of internet. In Colombia, it is only about 50% of the population is able to connect to internet. So you can define a very good strategy, but you are not going to be able to implement it. So we need to understand the business context. We need to understand that we have different levels, for example, of poverty, which is going to affect your performance. So I think that's a very important aspect. The second one is to being able to develop a sustained competitive advantage. Which is really different than a competitive advantage. When we talk about sustained competitive advantage, that means that the capacity of a company to have a service or a product that the competition is not able to copy. Mm-hmm. And what do I have as a company that my competition won't be able to copy in the long term? Mm-hmm. So as long as we are able to have a sustained competitive advantage, that helps a lot. And most of the time, that sustained competitive advantage comes from people. Your human capital becomes that competitive advantage. And the third one refers to building local capabilities at individual level and also at a collective level. And the fourth one, which refers to the previous question, is a robust corporate culture. What kind of company do we want to be? Do we want to be just a normal company generating profits, which is fine, or do we want to be a high performance company? And in that sense, we need to consider financial impact, environmental impact, and social impact, like in these three areas. So that helps a lot when you go abroad.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned what you did around people as well. So I've spent a lot of my life studying just the Virgin brand and Richard Branson. And if you ask him what the number one asset is in any corporate environment, it's the people, it's not the customer. And if you focus on the people, I think that has a really great play into the cultural officer discussion that we're having today, and probably another virtual panel on its own right. But the next question I'd like to get into is, how do you articulate the cultural capital within a global organization? And what are some of the tools or best practices that you're seeing within your own respective organizations, market or globally? And Darrell, if we could have you lead that one off.
Wow, that's a tough one. How do you articulate the cultural capital? I kind of back to what I was saying earlier. I think you just lead with that. I mean, that is, just the key, to being an effective global organization. And, looking at culture at every levels of where you're going to be targeting your consumers, essentially. And ensuring that you are building those strategies, those plans, those et cetera, those, go-to-market strategies, those everything that you do as a business, that you're doing it really relevant, for all the different cultures that you will be interacting with, and not necessarily just kind of looking at it from, we're XYZ, we've got the framework, we've got the strategy, and we're just going to implement it everywhere. I joke a lot about, Microsoft being headquartered in Redmond, but that is very different than, South LA, Dade County, or, UK or anywhere else that we're global. So, really, really understanding that the reliance on those people in those places as those subject matter experts, and really making that the backbone of any type of culture that you're putting together.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I appreciate that too, and it's great. The same company can be present anywhere in the world, and yet the environment can be completely different. And have an understanding of that is so important. Octavio, what is your response to that question?
Yes. Yeah. It's very interesting. I think we should consider social capital, that concept, because it reflects the value of social connections within people. Sometimes you have a very good team, you have a culture in your company, and your people, they are bonding. They have friends. They get a coffee. I mean, that's fine, but we need to go from bonding to bridging, because we share knowledge, and then we are sharing a purpose in the company. The reason we are in the same space in a company is not because we want to establish only a relationship. It's because we have a common purpose. So sometimes it worries me that I see so many articles about being happy within a companies. I mean, that's fine, that's great, but we need to have a main purpose, and we need to have a leadership that gets results. We need performance. We need to survive. And I think we need to combine both, bonding and bridging.
Well, I've spent a fair amount of time in Colombia, and the one thing I always do appreciate is the volume of coffee that exists at all of those meetings. So don't stop that as part of the process. Russ, would like to go over to you.
Yeah, I think maybe taking this from a slightly different angle. I was a bit surprised at the comment earlier. I think it was Paulo who said, such a small number of businesses in the U.S. are exporting. And to me, that is also a function that the U.S. is such an enormous market, 330 million people, largest economy in the world. When I deal with other organizations in different parts of the world, whether it's Singapore, Israel, New Zealand, or let's take Sweden, for example, inherent in those organizations, pretty much right from day one, is an international and export mentality. Why? Those countries are small. Sweden is, I think it's 9 million people, but yet look at what they've created. They've got IKEA, they've got Volvo, they've got Ericsson. We're seeing, Spotify, Klarna, these great startups emerging. A small country that really punches above its weight. And when I speak to the CEOs and the founders in those smaller countries, they say, look, we have to do this. It's inherent in our organization. And this is something that I'm sharing with UK leaders at the moment, because now that we're out of the European Union, and you mentioned the B word, Brexit, we have to encourage more of these businesses to look and expand internationally, because that massive market of 450 million people, we now sit outside of that. So it's really about getting the mindset right very early on. Some places have it. The US may not have it as much because it's a big market. When I travel to China, I don't see it in China because it's an enormous market. So those are some of the things that I think, a chief cultural officer can really help an organization deliver on.
So let's not forget the Swedish meatball as part of that list as well. And as some of you know, I come from the aviation industry, and when we talk about that statistic that Paula mentioned earlier about export, one of the challenges that I was often faced with was you could bring in an airplane full of goods, but it was very difficult to find goods to go back on the airplane to go out. So you have this thing called the traffic imbalance, and that's much opportunity that we have ahead of us in terms of what we have the ability to export. So we'll go over to Paula then for the next part of this question.
Chief cultural officer, because they have to have certain qualities already. They have to be relatable with any culture, whether it be in the domestic market or the international market. They have to have a certain aura and a je ne sais quoi to be able to connect, even be multilingual to a certain extent, because basically when they're confronted with, let's say we go to Brazil, it's all about trust over there. So for them to trust you, you have to be able to be coming there as basically have that aura of being non-threatening and wanting to be collaborative. So it's whoever, it's up to the HR department to really hire the right person to be in that role. Because I think it's not just anybody that can be in a role of a chief cultural officer. You have to have more than just knowing many languages, understanding what's going on in the world, but you have to have that certain collaborative aura, I would say. And so that I think would be very helpful when people look who will play that role in the organization.
Yep, absolutely. Very important, and I appreciate that as well. And Jose, you get the opportunity to close out this question.
Great. So culture is like evolution. It'll find a way. I mean, a culture will do things on its own, and whether you want it to or not, a culture is going to develop in any organization. So the question here is, who takes ownership of that? Who shapes it? Because culture adapts, it's flexible, it moves, and depending on the leadership, depending on where you're at, the different parts of your company may have different cultures. How do you ensure that it's cohesive? How do you ensure that it represents your brand, your product, your solution? So organizations need to pay attention to this. They need to invest time and resources in developing that culture and understanding it, how it's portrayed internally and how it's portrayed externally. And because of this, you need someone or a group of people or a team of people to actually take control. And I think talking about people, like Octavio was saying as well, a company is not just for the sake of being there. It has to find its place. There has to be a purpose for it here and a purpose for it also in other markets. So that purpose and vision must be clear internally as well as externally, so that people can relate to the brand and follow the vision and become part of that cohesive message. So that it is one, and so that it continues to develop in that sense with that guidance.
So very valid points as well. And just the other day, as we were preparing for this panel today, I got into a discussion with a couple of individuals, and the word perception came up an awful lot too, about the perceived messaging or efforts that are going on around Chief Cultural Officer. And it's really interesting to have different feedback from individuals all over the world in terms of what perception means to them. As we get into the next question, I'd like to know what your opinion is in terms of some of the key factors that companies should consider when going global, especially from the cultural and diplomacy side. And Jose, would you like to lead that off?
Sure. I think that one of the most important things is that if you are going global, first you must be ready internally. First, you must have all your operations working well at the local level. To expand too quickly, to expand without being prepared, it's a recipe for disaster. Mm-hmm. And in terms of your expansion, you need to know where you're going. You need to know the politics. You need to know the people. You need to understand the culture, the religion, the influencers in that country. I'll give you a perfect example. I was bringing a client of mine many years ago to Puerto Rico for what was to be the financing of a major public-private partnership, and they were going to meet with the governor at the time. And while we were on the plane going to Puerto Rico, he asked me a question that shocked me. And this was a financial person, C-level person within this institution that was backing this project. And he asked me, what currency is used in Puerto Rico? That threw up a bunch of red flags. How can you ask me this? My fault for assuming that he knew, our fault for not having this discussion. Sometimes assumptions lead to mistakes, and you can never assume that people understand where they're going and what they're getting into. So we took the rest of that plane ride to talk about what I thought was the most ludicrous and impossible, but we covered it just in case so that there would be no mistakes in that meeting. Had he asked that question at the governor's office, that would have been it for the project. And this happens many times. These faux pas happen many times only because of ignorance, because lack of knowledge of where you're going. And you'll say something or do something that leads to a situation that could have been easily avoided. So understanding where you're going is, I think, the number one thing in terms of global expansion.
Absolutely. And I can tell you so many stories just about travels to the Middle East and what socially acceptable practice is, the way you dress, the way that you greet somebody in Asia. I mean, you have to be aware of all of this as you move forward. Darrell, what are your thoughts in terms of this question?
Yeah, I think, what kind of comes to mind for me is, not leading with, okay, how much additional revenue can we make by expansion and going global? And I say that to say is lead with, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And, what is it that, our particular product or service can be used to address that problem? And then what tweaks do we need to make? I say that to say it really helps you to ensure that, when you're going global, you're not, round peg and square hole, trying to just force this thing that worked really well in said location to work somewhere else. That's something at Microsoft we had to look at with, trying to do some expansion in Africa, and just that continent and just some of the, lack of high speed internet. So even thinking of, wanting to provide digital skilling to that region, and having to step back and say, you know what, we can't deliver the skilling in the manner that we normally would. So even within our philanthropies team, our engineering team built a solution called Microsoft Community Training. And from the ground up, the foundation of the platform was built to work really well in, low bandwidth areas, to have the offline capabilities, to have some of the things that was needed for that region that previously, wasn't considered. So that's my take. You lead with that, and you get that really good product and service that's matching that problem or that need in that particular area, and then the dollars will come after that.
So you bring up some really interesting pieces of information there, and even when you localize it, not even talking about developing areas of the world, but in modern developed parts of the world, I can tell you that in Miami-Dade County itself, about a third of the entire population does not have access to the internet, which means they're not getting access to other things. And who would even believe that statistic is even accurate, given the modern world in which we live in? But great points. Octavio, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, John. Yeah, I totally agree with Jose and Darrell in terms of what Jose was mentioning, the assumptions. Sometimes we believe people interpret something, and then we realize they perceive it in a different way. That's what I think communication of values is important when you are trying to go global. You need to be able to communicate the values of the company. It's like, let me give you an example with the branding area. You have a concept that could be the same in different countries, but the way you communicate the brand concept might be different in each country. So I think we need to focus on that. The second aspect is we need to have a small wins. Sometimes you have this strategic plan, but also we need to focus on the action plan. We need to focus on very small wins. You don't need to be the market leader the first year, and you don't need to rush. And the other one is filling the market. For example, if you're selling food products, you need to go to a retail store and see how consumers behave. What about shelves, retailing? So we need to have the feeling of the market. That brings a lot of information. And the third one is, I always believe that the best strategy is the one that has a positive impact on financial statements. Sometimes there is a process of defining strategies within companies, and so many plans and so many PowerPoint presentations, very good, but they don't deliver. Yep. The best strategy is the one that has a positive impact on financial statement or other dimensions.
I'm glad you used the word branding and branding awareness. And I just think about one of the biggest mistakes that was ever made. That's a great case study, is Chevy and the Chevy Nova, and trying to sell the Chevy Nova in Spanish-speaking countries, and what that translates to as the no-go car, essentially. But that's a really great example, I think, that I constantly use when the conversation does come up. Russ, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, actually for me, and maybe a bit of a personal experience, Global Tech Advocates, we've gone from this starting in London, and we now have 18 groups around the world, and we grow organically. So people have come to me to say, oh, I'd like to set up a group in Japan or in Canada or wherever. And so for me, one of the things I've learned is through all of that and through the cultural differences is really understanding the values of the leaders and why they want to set up these communities to help and support their ecosystems. And that for me has been an amazing part of this, is to really get to know people wherever they are in the world who aspire to do something that has purpose and vision and really about helping the ecosystem has been absolutely fascinating. We were scheduled to launch our 19th group this Friday in India. And set up Tech India Advocates. And I'm sure, as many of you know, the situation in India with the pandemic is incredibly serious and very difficult. And we haven't yet launched the group, but the leaders of the group this week decided not to do it. They sent out an elegant communication to all of those who registered to participate. And I looked at that and I thought, wow, talk about, culturally understanding why they needed to do this and how they communicated it really reassured me that we've got the right leaders for this next group. So there's all of these interesting examples that come to the values that I think leaders bring to the table when they think about going global.
Okay, thank you. And obviously news in the news, and it sounds like it was the right decision. Paula, we'd like to have you close out this part of the question. What are some of the key factors that companies should consider when going global, especially from the cultural and diplomacy side?
Well, I'm glad that you're asking that question, because that's exactly what we try to teach companies. All of the speakers here touch about some important points that are part of this step-by-step process that I mentioned before, but having a really good export plan, because you really have to have look at so many components when you go into a country. First of all, are we allowed to export there? You may have wonderful relationships in Iran, but we cannot export to Iran, So you have to look at, the regulations. You have to consider, they touched upon protocol. Protocol is extremely important. As a matter of fact, we just launched our protocol manual for the county for international trade, and we're going to start giving training about protocol. We also have different series when we doing business with the world, which actually I'm doing this afternoon, doing business with Jamaica. We touch upon these intricacies with the protocol. How do you, once you have that strategy, once you go into those markets, once you have those relationships, but then, you have to respect the protocol. We can't, when you're traveling to those countries on trade missions with us or with the governor, you're not only representing your corporation, but you're representing the US. You're representing your region locally, and you're representing your country. So there's been countless of stories we've had on trade missions, where we really have to follow the protocol and the etiquette in those countries. So I think all of the speakers touched upon some of the considerations. There are many, and that's why we do those classes to teach companies to not make those faux pas, when they go to market. But I think one of the main thing is really to do a great export plan. And there's even a grant available from Enterprise Florida and SBDC that can help manufacturers have an export plan done professionally by the SBDC. And that would really help you to put all these elements together and how to penetrate a new market, global market. Yes.
Yeah, so those types of resources are just spectacular, and the more we build, then the better off we all are. Appreciate that. Thank you. There's an increased use of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and spatial computing, just as examples. Are such technologies assisting companies to create an inclusive culture as it relates to attracting and retaining human capital? This may be a challenging question, but Darrell, I'd like to start with you.
I am so glad you started with me. I haven't even heard my colleagues' answer, but I'm already going to respectfully disagree if anyone says anything different than this. But as I look at what is April 28th, 2021, AI and inclusive culture to me shouldn't even be in the same sentence. We're not there yet. I mean, literally, these terms, diversity, inclusion, we're talking about culture. 2 years ago, there wasn't even, real topics. We just said, CCO is relatively new. We also know the issues that exist right now with AI. There are a lot of biases that still exist. We need to fix these things. And if in order to get close, or if you look at the backbone of creating AI and models and all that, it's still done by a human. So what I'm saying is we really still need to focus on the education with the humans and how we deal in cultural environments and be inclusive as possible. And it kind of goes back to the last question that I wanted to chime in and say, when we look at the challenges, I think one of the issues is not spending enough time to understand culture. Jose kind of mentioned he took that opportunity for that plane ride to kind of have this level set conversation. We don't do that enough. And, even with me, I struggle a little bit, and I'm going to bring it, back down, not from a global standpoint, but even from a community standpoint. There are a lot of conversations where I'm representing the Black community and the Black culture. And, there may be someone I'm chatting with, and, there's a lack of understanding. And we're wanting to get to that business decision so quick. especially now in a rush. You're on a 30-minute call. You're like, let's just get to it. And there's not enough time saying, okay, let's step back. Let's really understand. I need you to educate me on your culture because I don't know. Once I know that, then let's make an informed decision. So whenever that time is that we as humans are effectively doing that, then we can, train those models to do it with AI.
So Jose, Darrell set the foundation for. Do you agree or disagree? Respectfully,
I do. I do agree with Darrell. And listen, a lot of us are in here in technology and make our business because of technology. So I'm gonna put technology down. But like Darrell said, I mean, AI, machine learning, all of these tools, the definitions and the algorithms are set by us, by the people first. And machines don't know any better. Computer programs don't know any better. So if a definition is set in this manner by a human, by default, the program is going to exclude everything else that's outside of that definition. So hence now it's become not inclusive. It's become exclusive. So how can you have, this? It's a dichotomy here. You really can't have both of these together. I totally agree with Darrell. And in terms of that definition and setting those boundaries, we have a lot to go there in terms of that. So until we don't fix the human side, we can't expect the machines to be any better than us and the programs to be any better than us.
Okay, so we're 2 for 2. Octavio, what's your thought?
I would like to say that artificial intelligence attracts people, but companies' purpose retain people. I think we still have a huge gap in terms of the implementation of artificial intelligence, especially in Latin America. Only 8% of the whole number of companies are implementing artificial intelligence initiatives. So I think that maybe there is an opportunity to work on the ecosystem. How can we help small companies to reach artificial intelligence? We can perhaps explore ways to help the ecosystem. Usually in Latin American countries, we have the 90 or 95% of the total number of companies are small companies. So they are a very important actor, and we have a technology gap, and we have an artificial intelligence gap that could help these companies to be more efficient and also to go global in the future. So I think, yeah, if we work on the ecosystem, that will help a lot.
Great, thank you very much. Paula?
I think we have to be careful with AI, as it was mentioned, because while it could be a tool and it could help access, different opportunities, like we talk about in international terms, we talk about virtual matchmaking, especially now with what's going on with the pandemic, which is a great tool to help companies connect, but we cannot lose the human touch, because that's key, and that's what we're talking about today, that the Chief Cultural Officer really fosters the human connectivity, the human touch to everything. So it's important, yes, to have a good strategy for your AI that can integrate with your international strategy as a complement, but not to, rely on that. I've seen some companies that we're just going to rely on e-commerce and just basically, but sometimes you have to have a broader scope, broader strategy on how you promote your brand. So that would be my take on this.
Great, thank you. And Russ, you get to close this one out.
Sure. For me, this is about data. And let's face it, over the past several years, the data sets that have been built have been designed by white men. And we are now on process of, having a whole next generation of impact from those data sets that have been designed by white men. And so we're on a drive here to say, look, we've got a window that's shrinking. We need more women. We need more Black tech leaders. We need more people with disabilities to be in the room to look at and evaluate those data sets, because those biases, whether they are an intentional one or not, are going to create a whole next generation of issues and problems. And if we don't solve those problems ourselves, many governments will. Last week, the European Union proposed legislation that will ban AI and AI algorithms around recruitment, around dispatching emergency services, around credit scoring, and a whole host of other examples where they're just saying, we don't want AI as part of this. Now, I don't think that's the solution, but I can see where they're coming from, because they're saying, you've got all of these inherent biases in these data sets, and if they don't get fixed, we're creating a massive set of problems for the next generation.
That's very good points as well. And we're getting close to the last few minutes of our panel, and there are literally a ton of questions that I'm not going to be able to get to today, which makes me believe that we need to do a round two. We did this with spatial computing because we found out that it was so exciting that everybody wanted to come back, and there was so much more to say. So I think that we'll be revisiting, and hopefully you'll all come back for round two. And I have a lot of questions around best practices for working within multicultural teams, and how economic globalization is bridging cultural gaps or not, and different types of strategies that we can implement in terms of cross-cultural communication barriers, among other things. What I would like to do is, Darrell, I'd just give you an opportunity for one final question, if you could do a quick response, and then I'm going to surprise everybody with something called the lightning round. So, Darrell, can you share how Microsoft creates an open and inclusive workplace environment so that all team members feel empowered to contribute to the company's overall mission and objective?
Yeah, it's, I've only been with the organization going on my third year, and, been in tech 20 plus years, and just had this vision that Microsoft is this mammoth company. I'm going to be just a guy in a cubicle. But it very much wasn't that. As I came in, Tech Social Impact was a new organization geared towards nonprofit. And from day one, my experience for a nonprofit was value, and how we shape our strategies. And the same thing happened with this latest initiative, literally on a all hands call on June 11th. And I spoke about, just some of the things that were happening in our community in the wake of that George Floyd killing, and how I thought we can connect with our Black and brown communities. And literally 2 hours later, my skip manager pinged me, and I started crafting what was in place. So Microsoft really has this culture of saying, let's really rely on the people that know. And I think one of the things real quick that has kind of helped that is, around the organizational structure, and the roles that you define, and then also making sure that, no one person or group of people just have so much power that, but instead you really rely on everybody as part of the team in order to make informed decisions.
Yep, great response. Okay, so we're entering the lightning round, and I know that we didn't get to cover a lot of information, so this is your opportunity, let's say 20 seconds or less, to tell our audience one thing that we didn't get to cover in the questions. What is that one burning thing that you have to say? Paula, we'll lead with you.
Okay, I think that the one thing we didn't have to say is that basically take advantage of the government resources and the resources you have out there. If you're a business listening, just contact your local government if you're in Broward County, or your state government, because there are so many tools and resources that we have available, and even grants. So that's one thing we didn't have a chance to elaborate too many on the available resources for companies, but I think that's what I would like to leave people with, that they should take the phone, because that's their taxpayers' money, or email us. And I guess, you can find us online at browardcounty.org, and then, broward.org, and you just go to EconDev, and you'll get all the information about our.
Great, thank you. Octavio.
Yes, I would like to say that we should go from a fixed mindset to growth mindset in terms of developing new skills for people. So we have a very good team. We have to push that team to develop new type of skills through time. The other thing is about avoiding hidden traps in decision making. Companies are going so fast, and we need to avoid overconfidence trap and the status quo trap. And let me say one final thing is we need to have ambition to conquer the world in good terms. A company should have ambition, because ambition is, when you see in a positive way, is a very important tool.
Okay, so world domination, I love it. All right, Darrell.
Really quick. So, the majority of the work that I love to do is really at the community level. So I didn't get a chance to talk a lot about that. But, when Russ talks about, training those next people to make those AIs better, defining culture, building our next set of entrepreneurs, it's done at the community levels. It's done at these innovation centers. It's done at these nonprofit organizations. They're the backbone of America. Even when we think about government, federal, state, local, so much work is contracted out to community-based nonprofits in order to do the work. So if anybody wants to chat about those things, connect with me on LinkedIn, IG, Twitter, @TalkToDarrell, because I'm trying to get to every community I can, at least within this country.
Excellent. Thank you. Russ.
Yeah, one quick thing from my perspective is around IP or intellectual property. I meet so many businesses that want to go global, and I think the Chief Cultural Officer role needs to bear this in mind, to really have a plan and strategy around your IP, because different markets, different locations around the world will have different assumptions about how your IP can be used. If you get it right, it's a key part of your success formula. If you get it wrong, it's a nightmare, and it can be incredibly costly and potentially undermine your business's overall well-being.
Great point. And Jose, you get to close this one.
Well, thank you. I am a true believer in the Chief Cultural Officer methodology. I think that this is how you innovate. This is how you lead. This is how you disrupt. This is how you inspire. This is how you scale in terms of, a fluid global economy. So I say to all, join us, join this vision, visit our website, come take our certificate program, and be a part of this. Change things personally. Become part of the movement.
I was going to use the word movement if you didn't. So not only is a vision, it is a movement. In terms of key takeaways, I'd like to refer once again to Roberto Macero's book, Chief Cultural Officer. The place for corporations and governments exists. The new experience must also include an active recognition of the value of the human element that spurs innovation. This focus must define, operationalize, and govern the learning, economic, and impact elements of the institutions wishing to innovate. Institutions can go a step farther and create more value for the Chief Cultural Officer. In addition to the person-centered sensitivity that values each of the workers at multiple levels, the CCO is tasked and skilled with managing the cultural nuances of the workers inside and outside the corporation. The goal is to create a suitable bridge for the communication of context and value both from the corporation and from the host culture inward. I cannot thank each of you enough for participating in today's virtual panel. Thank you for everything that you're doing to support everything that we're talking about today and more. And again, I really truly think we should revisit this as a phase 2 panel, because we've just scratched the surface. There is way too much information that we need to continue on with our discussions. Thank you, Russ Shaw from Global Tech Advocates, Octavio Ibarra from Universidad del Norte, Darrell from Microsoft, Paula Brea from Broward County, and Jose Rodriguez from Sigfox Caribbean. The Alan B. Levan NSU Broward Center of Innovation will open this summer. In the meantime, we are offering scheduled virtual events, and you can view our calendar by visiting our webpage, nova.edu/innovation. Or you can email us at innovation@nova.edu, or you can call our hotline, where one of our pleasant, happy operators will be standing by at 954-262-TECH, TECH. Don't forget to check us out on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you for joining us today. Stay safe and healthy. And this concludes today's virtual panel. Thank you, everybody. Greatly appreciated. All right,